Campbell!
Save our trees!
Clear-cut 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 Campbell!
Save our trees!
Clear-cut
Public fight against forest. Public fight against forest.
Well, thanks everybody for showing up at this Parade of the Ents and rally against the working forest. We are quite inspired to get a grove of Ents happening here to come and defend BC's public lands and their public forests against the increased privatization. The BC Liberals have given themselves an open door to implement the working forest through a small elite few. It's the cabinet, in fact the Minister of Sustainable Resource Management, or a delegate, a non-elected delegate of the Minister of Sustainable Resource Management, who will implement the working forest as they see fit, whenever they want, without any necessary public scrutiny. Gordon Campbell's working forest is not for working families, it's for the wealthy corporations of this province that financed his election. They've actually included provisions to facilitate the sell-off of Crown lands to private logging companies. That's privatization. So by contrast, you, the BC public, don't have certainty on our own public lands. For example, our newest protected area that the BC public pushed for, the South Chilcotin, the Liberals are planning to downsize or eliminate our newest protected area altogether. That's a double standard. Neither do you receive compensation when private logging companies dirty your drinking water, destroy the salmon and trout habitat, destroy your recreation opportunities, and turn your scenic viewscapes into stumps. Neither do First Nations receive any compensation for the taking of their resources on their unceded territories by these private logging companies. So if it doesn't work for working families, it's not a working forest. If it doesn't work for wildlife, it's not a working forest. If it doesn't work for First Nations, it's not a working forest. And if it doesn't work for you, the BC public, it's not a working forest. A real working forest is a wild forest. A real working forest leaves public options open on public lands. A real working forest is open to sustainable community forestry, to new protected areas, to First Nations control, and to a thriving tourism industry in supernatural British Columbia.
This government has gone farther than any other government in North America towards privatization, deregulation, and the exclusion of the people from the decision-making that is supposed to be their entitlement in a free society. Shame on them. We are experiencing the enclosure of our public forests at this time because under NAFTA rules, which are essentially the American law, there is compensation against future losses. That is to say, into an indefinite future of the foregone profits that would have been had should those trees have been cut down. The objective of these foreign investor rights is to constrain governments from regulating business. It used to be the other way around, we thought. But in fact, business is now regulating government through these free trade agreements. A working forest is a fully intact forest, a thriving, healthy ecosystem that took thousands of years to develop. A fully developed watershed is one where everything is intact. But what the industry refers to as fully developed is where that particular watershed has been hammered from stem to stern. Fully developed means completely depleted. We've got to change this language. Working forest is exhausted forest, depleted forest, not the forests that give us all those free services of water, clean water, of clean air, of habitat for countless species. That is what we have to protect. I assure you we're into the fight of our lives here, because we will never see another protected area in this province if this legislation succeeds. It cannot succeed.
This legislative session is going to be one of the most important in our provincial history here in British Columbia. The working forest legislation is but just one plank in their overall radical shift in forest policy. They also plan to bring in legislation that will forever tear up the social contract, that will forever separate the resource from jobs and the community. More and more unemployed people will be living on the coast and in the interior. They will be sitting there unemployed, watching raw logs increasingly shipped forever to far away plants. That's the future under this BC Liberal government. We will do everything we can to stop this radical agenda.
The most important action needed now in our forest is to reduce the annual allowable cut. We are using our natural forest capital at too great a rate. We believe that tenure reform is needed to break the stranglehold that large multinational forest companies have in the forest industry in BC. This means that communities, native people and small value-added businesses would get more access to the wood supply. Does this document help that to happen? No, because this is all about increasing the security of private logging corporations.
This corporate clear-cut policy that they're trying to sell as a working forest policy is likely the most devastating thing that's going to hit our forests in the past 50 years. This will allow companies to close processing plants with no penalties and thereby increase their log exports. This will virtually put an end to any community forest alternatives, any options for a different type of forestry, any control over our watersheds, and totally shut out small processing plants and value-added manufacturers. The companies get ultimate security over our public lands, control to carve at will and sell tenure to other companies with no public or government benefit or input and no loss of tenure. The ability to cut any amount of the 5-year allotment at any time, making pawns of the workers and communities. The removal of any and all social responsibility to the very workers and communities the TFLs were created to protect. The ability to close mills with no penalty and thereby increase raw log exports. Here in BC, the largest exporters of logs are also the largest tenure holders on our public land, an absolute contradiction of interest. The one thing that's right about the proposed changes is that change is due. But the changes must not come at the expense of our communities, forest workers, and the environment. There are forests. We must have a say.
Today, I'm actually representing a new group. It's the Women in the Woods. We are an all-women's group we are concentrating on forest issues, and we are also a direct action group. We decided to talk to Mr. Stan Hagen. So we got an appointment with him. A couple of us came in and talked to Mr. Hagen. And we didn't like what Mr. Hagen had to say. You know, it just didn't really make a lot of sense that he was just giving all of our public forest over to the transnational logging companies. So I decided to stay for a while and see if Mr. Hagen was going to say anything very sensible. Maybe after a while he might. But he didn't, so I just stayed. And the security people took me away. They take me off to jail, and then you'll have to spend the night, and you'll see a judge in the morning. I said, okay, because this is really what I wanted to do, was see a judge. We have to kind of get this into court, because you know what? This is the most beautiful province, the most beautiful place in the entire world. It's a place where we can go out into a forest and we can touch the very heart of creation. We can feel the spirit of creation in these forests. We have to protect them. We have to protect them. They are so rare in this world, and they are ours. They belong to us, and you know what? Prison is a small price to pay for protecting these public forests of British Columbia. Thank you very much.
We have 1,000 species at risk in this forest. And you've got creatures there that are a heartbeat from leaving this planet forever. Do we want more corporate certainty? Do we want more treatment of the lands like is happening on the east coast of Vancouver Island over this whole province? No! I sit in New Westminster, I go for a walk to relax, I look across the river, what do I see? The Surrey docks. And what do I see stretched along the Surrey docks? A freaking raw log barge here, a great big ship loaded with raw logs heading for Korea, lined up and down the goddamn river like I've never seen before, and I've lived on that river my whole life. It's like giving the rights to your lungs to tobacco companies to be able to carve up your lungs from now to eternity. That's what's going on with this working forest legislation. It's been called the worst anti-environmental legislation in the history of the province, and it is, and it has to line up with all the fish farm stuff, but it's something else. It's the most anti-democratic legislation we've seen. This working forest legislation has to stop, but I'll tell you one thing. Democracy is like a river. You can slow it down, you can dam it, but you cannot stop it. It will burst. And this government will burst because you do not do to the ecosystem and the people what this government's been doing. It's got to go down.
A key thing here is that on March the 14th, that is the official deadline for the public input on the working forest. They gave us 7 weeks for the giveaway of 100% of this province's unprotected public forest lands. 7 weeks for the giveaway of 45 million hectares of this province. Get onto the government website and the Ministry of Sustainable Resource Management, an Orwellian term, and and write your comments for everybody to see. We can whip them at their own game. Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming out. Let's take a stand for public lands. Let's stop the working forests, and let's export Gordon Campbell. Thank you very much.